Welcome back. How long have you been watching my channel? Let me know below.
My sister always said I had main character syndrome, and I always smiled and let her have that joke, even though she was the one who curated her life like it was a social media reel, demanded centerpieces at every family dinner, and once made my father reintroduce her at Thanksgiving after he forgot to mention her recent promotion. Amber was the kind of person who turned any room into a stage and any gathering into a personal parade. And yet, somehow, I was the one with the syndrome. That irony wasn't lost on me, not when she hijacked my 30th birthday by arriving late, wearing white, and announcing she'd been asked to audition for a cooking show that no one had ever heard of, but everyone suddenly cared about more than the cake I had paid for myself. But I had learned by then to let things slide, to smile politely and smooth the wrinkles of our lives with silence. Because in our family, Amber was the oxygen everyone needed, and I was the air that just kept the room from suffocating. Growing up, I learned early how to fold myself into the corners of our house, how to be helpful without being seen, present without taking up space. My parents didn't do it maliciously, at least not at first. They just noticed Amber more. She was louder, prettier, flashier. She cried with flourish and laughed like she was performing. When she won something, there was cake. When I got straight A's, there was a distracted, "Good job, Claire," from behind a newspaper. I was the reliable daughter, the one who got herself to and from school, the one who never broke curfew because no one noticed I was gone. Even now, after everything, I can still hear my mom saying, "Claire's always been so easy, like being easy was a virtue, like being invisible was the reward." The announcement of Amber's engagement came with a photo shoot, a monogrammed hashtag, and a brunch that somehow cost more than my first car. I remember the exact moment she told us. She made Dad film it, of course, and told me to sit closer so the frame looked balanced. She held out her hand like a pageant queen and squealed so loudly my ears rang for a full minute afterward. Ryan stood beside her, smiling like a politician, one arm around her waist and the other holding up a bottle of champagne someone had conveniently chilled. I just nodded and said congratulations, even though something in my stomach tightened when his eyes flicked to mine. Not in a creepy way, but in a calculating one, like he was memorizing my face, not appreciating it. I brushed it off. I had just finalized my divorce 2 months earlier, and I wasn't in the mood to project my baggage onto someone else's fiancé. Everyone around Amber seemed to buy into the dream she built, especially Ryan. He was charming, successful, one of those men who never raised his voice, but always seemed like he could destroy you in 3 sentences. He had this calmness that unsettled me, too smooth, too composed, like he'd practiced being likable. And maybe that was just me being jaded, freshly single and emotionally bruised. But I'd learned to listen to that voice in my gut, the one I'd ignored too many times before. I didn't meet Tina, Ryan's ex, until about 3 weeks before the wedding, at a client appreciation event my firm hosted downtown. She was there with someone from a finance firm we'd contracted, and we ended up standing near the shrimp cocktail tray, exchanging tired pleasantries about overpriced wine and uncomfortable heels. It was one of those easy, instant connections you don't expect in your 30s. She was sharp, funny, blunt in a way I appreciated. We got to talking about relationships, casually at first, and I said something like, "My sister's getting married soon." And she rolled her eyes and said, "Lucky her, mine ended last year, and I still can't delete his Netflix profile." We both laughed. It felt normal. For once, I was talking to someone who didn't treat me like the supporting character in my sister's Broadway show. The conversation shifted without warning. She mentioned her ex's name, Ryan. My drink froze halfway to my mouth. I don't know what showed on my face, but she caught it immediately. I remember her voice going quiet, more careful. "Ryan Harper?" she asked. And when I didn't answer right away, she added, "Tall, clean-cut real estate stuff, family money, kinda too perfect?" I told her the truth. That yes, my sister was marrying a Ryan Harper, and yes, he matched that description. And no, I had no idea she had dated him. Her expression was something between disbelief and disgust. "Wow," she said, staring at her glass. "Small world. Or maybe just a trashy one. I should have walked away. I should have said something neutral and polite and backed out of that conversation with grace. But I didn't. I stayed. I listened. I laughed when she told me stories. Stories about how charming he was at first. How quickly he turned cold when things got serious. How he once told her she was too emotional when she cried after her grandmother died. And then I said something I didn't think much about at the time, something offhanded and maybe bitter. He hasn't changed. I saw messages on his phone last month from someone saved as J. Amber thinks it's a work contact. But come on. That sentence would echo in my life like a grenade rolling under a dinner table. Tina's eyes narrowed. Jay? Yeah, I said, realizing I'd said too much. Just forget I mentioned it. But she didn't. Of course she didn't. 2 days later, Amber called me. Her voice was shaking and shrill. Did you talk to Ryan's ex? Did you tell her something? I played dumb. I said I barely knew the woman, that we talked about wine and shoes and nothing important. Amber didn't believe me, but she let it go, or so I thought. Until the wedding rehearsal dinner, when I saw Tina again, sitting at the bar, alone, watching my sister with an expression I couldn't read. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, she just raised her glass slightly like a warning. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't finished. It had been a week since the wine bar encounter with Tina, and I kept replaying every detail of that night in my head like an old cassette tape, worn and warbled from overuse, except this time the tape was my conscience, and the static was the sound of something unraveling inside me. I hadn't meant for anything to happen. I genuinely hadn't. And even now, I'm not sure if I told her those things because I needed to finally say them out loud to someone, or because some small, hidden part of me had been waiting for years for someone, anyone, to help me turn the dial and crack the perfect porcelain facade my sister had spent her entire life polishing. After Amber's panicked call, I tried to convince myself that it was fine, that Tina wouldn't do anything reckless, that people say all sorts of things over drinks and forget them by morning. But then I remembered the way she had gone silent when I mentioned the texts, how her eyes had sharpened not with curiosity, but with recognition, like she'd found a piece of a puzzle she hadn't known was missing until I handed it to her, gift wrapped in my own carelessness. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility, that Amber and Ryan had chosen each other and would handle whatever secrets they were hiding without my help. But that didn't stop the gnawing sense that I had lit a match and walked away without checking to see how dry the forest was. 2 days after the rehearsal dinner, Tina texted me. She said she wanted to talk. I considered ignoring it, deleting it, pretending I'd never seen it, but I didn't. I told her to meet me at a coffee shop near the park, one that didn't serve alcohol and had enough noise to make eavesdropping difficult. When I walked in and saw her already waiting at a table in the corner, hair pulled back tight, lips pursed like she'd spent the last hour chewing on everything she hadn't said yet, I knew I was in trouble. And still, I sat down. She didn't waste time. Claire, I need you to tell me exactly what you saw on his phone. I took a long sip of coffee, partly to buy time, partly to keep my hands from shaking. It was a few weeks ago. He left his phone on the table during brunch. Amber was in the bathroom. A message popped up from someone saved as Jay. Just the letter. It said something like, I need the next payment by Friday, or I'm done being quiet. Tina's expression didn't shift much, but I saw something behind her eyes. Fear, maybe, or vindication. You didn't screenshot it? No, I said, regretting that even as I said it. I wasn't snooping, I just glanced. But it felt wrong, like whoever that was, it wasn't someone Amber knew about. Tina leaned back in her chair, folding her arms like she was trying to keep herself from flying apart. He used to save me under letters. First time I caught him cheating, I was L. Next time, I was T. I stared at her, unsure whether to feel horrified or embarrassed for thinking my sister's was somehow immune. I didn't mean to stir anything up. Tina shook her head. You didn't, he did. You just gave me the last piece. She told me things I didn't want to hear. Stories that mirrored the ones Amber had always brushed off. How Ryan gaslit her for months. How he once bought her flowers after a fight and left the receipt in the bag, with another woman's name on it. How he was careful, calculated, always one step ahead. She wasn't telling me for pity. She was laying groundwork. I realized then she wasn't here to share. She was preparing for something, and I was part of it now. I told her, probably stupidly, "Don't do anything rash. It's not my place. It's not yours either." She looked at me like I'd just said the sky was green. "Claire, if your sister's about to marry someone who's paying someone off to stay quiet, don't you think someone should say something? If it's not you, it's going to be me. And believe me, I won't say it gently." I felt the air shift. The little hairs on my arms rose. She wasn't threatening me. She was promising me. I could have backed out then, could have told Amber everything, could have lied and said I misunderstood the whole thing, and maybe that message wasn't even shady. I could have tried to defuse the bomb before it detonated, but I didn't. I told Tina one more thing, that my gut had never liked Ryan, that something about his smile always seemed rehearsed, that I hoped I was wrong, but deep down I knew I wasn't. She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Good, then you won't be surprised." When I left the coffee shop, I didn't tell Amber I had seen Tina again. I didn't tell anyone. I buried it like I had buried so many things. My doubts, my disappointments, the dozens of moments where I bit my tongue while Amber danced on the table and took credit for the music. But this time, I wasn't sure if the burial would hold. The night before the wedding, Amber called me again. She was nervous, fluttery, hyper like she always got before a big event. She wanted to know if her vows sounded too perfect, if her dress needed another fitting, if the place cards were pretentious or charming. I said all the right things. I told her she'd be the most beautiful bride anyone had ever seen. I told her Ryan was lucky. I didn't tell her that I was terrified she was walking into a trap. And then, on the wedding day itself, right before the music started, right before the curtain lifted on her big Broadway moment, I saw Tina standing near the back of the room, holding a champagne flute, and watching the stage like it was a battlefield. That's when I knew it wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a reckoning. The ceremony began exactly 34 minutes late, because Amber had decided, as she often did, that nothing could begin without her dramatic entrance. And when she finally emerged at the top of the garden staircase, all white lace and trained smile, with a wind machine hidden just out of view to make her veil billow like she was starring in a shampoo commercial, the crowd collectively held its breath in the kind of reverence that only a certain brand of wealthy performance can command. Amber had orchestrated every detail of this day as if she were building a shrine to herself. From the classical string quartet playing Coldplay covers to the imported peonies that had to be flown in overnight because her florist had made the fatal error of ordering them in soft blush instead of bone white. And yet, despite the immaculate execution, despite the matching flower girl capes and monogrammed fans and choreographed bridal party entrance, there was a tension beneath the surface of it all that clung to the air like static. I felt it in the way Ryan wouldn't quite meet my eyes as he took his place at the altar. His expression neutral to the point of artificiality, like he'd rehearsed a dozen safe expressions and couldn't remember which one to wear in the moment. I felt it in the way my parents avoided asking me to pose in any of the family photos, positioning themselves proudly beside Amber in her glow while I stood somewhere between the wedding planner and the catering assistant, holding someone's purse and pretending I didn't mind. I felt it most in the silence of my own stomach, which had gone tight and sick the moment I saw Tina slip into a seat 3 rows from the back, sunglasses still on, her mouth pulled into a half smile like she knew the end of the story before anyone else had finished reading the first chapter. The ceremony passed in a blur of soft vows and applause, the kind of glossy perfection that photographs well but leaves you wondering afterward what anyone actually said. I remember clapping. I remember Amber crying at just the right moment. Not too early, not too messy, just enough to convince everyone that the depth of her emotion matched the height of her heels. I remember Ryan sliding the ring on her finger and kissing her like someone who understood how to pose, not how to love. And then we were at the reception, seated under a silk canopy that shimmered in the late afternoon sun, as waiters moved with military precision, pouring champagne into flutes that cost more than the rent on my apartment. by the time the toasts began. I was already calculating my escape, wondering how long I'd have to stay before it was socially acceptable to vanish, how many fake smiles I'd have to muster before I could take off my shoes and breathe again. The maid of honor spoke first, a sorority friend who used the words iconic and manifested unironically, and ended her speech by sobbing into her wine glass, while Amber patted her hand like a benevolent queen comforting her most loyal subject. Then my father stood, clearing his throat like he was addressing the boardroom, and gave a speech so sterilized by cliches that I honestly don't remember a single sentence, except the part where he called Amber the pride of our family and forgot to mention me at all. I was next, not because I wanted to be. I hadn't planned on speaking at all, but because Amber had insisted, cornering me the night before with that condescending smile she always wore when she wanted something. Come on, Claire, you're the smart one. Say something meaningful for once. So I stood, I held my glass, I smiled at the 100 expectant faces watching me, and I told the safest, most forgettable version of the truth I could manage. I said that Amber had always been a force of nature, that Ryan was lucky, that love was a journey, and today was just the beginning. I saw Amber relax visibly in her chair, nodding at all the right moments, certain I wouldn't embarrass her. I even made a joke, something about how, as sisters, we'd fought over everything from Barbie dolls to boy bands, but she always won, and that tradition clearly continued with weddings too. It got a laugh. It bought me goodwill. It almost felt like I'd gotten away with it. Almost. Because then, just as I lowered my glass, just as the guests began politely clapping and Amber reached for her cocktails with a smirk of satisfied superiority, Tina stood. No microphone, no warning. Just one voice, clear and cutting across the soft hum of music and chatter like a scalpel. Tell them what you told me last month. Every sound in the tent vanished at once, like someone had hit mute on the entire party. A waiter froze mid-pour. My mother's face went pale. My father blinked like he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Amber turned slowly in her chair. Her jaw clenched so tightly, I thought I heard her teeth grind. "What did she just say?" she hissed. Tina didn't move. She just pointed, not at Ryan, not at the happy couple, but directly at me. "Tell them, Claire. Tell them what you told me at the bar." I could feel every eye lock onto me like searchlights, burning through the thin fabric of my composure, exposing every thought I had tried so hard to bury beneath polite nods and family duty. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I looked at Tina, who was standing calmly, evenly, like a lawyer addressing a courtroom, and then at Amber, whose smile had shattered into something feral, a twisted parody of bridal bliss. I started, but the word caught. I took a deep breath, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only thing keeping me upright. "Fine," I said finally. Louder than I meant to, the word cracking through the silence like a thunderclap. That was all it took. Gasps, whispers. My mother's hand flying to her chest. Amber rising from her chair, a flicker of panic in her eyes. Ryan, still seated, blinking slowly, calculating something, maybe realizing that the house of cards he'd built was about to come down. I didn't know what Tina expected me to say. I didn't know what Amber feared I'd say. But I knew in that moment that I couldn't take it back, couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't play the quiet sister who kept the peace while everyone else set fire to the truth and danced around the ashes. I was tired of pretending. I had seen the message. I had heard the lie. I had ignored the voice in my gut for too long. And now the truth was waiting to be spoken, whether they were ready for it or not. The silence that followed my fine wasn't the kind of silence that settles quietly into a room, giving people space to breathe and recover. It was the kind that stretches, suffocates, and multiplies, creeping into every corner of a carefully curated world and turning beauty into threat, laughter into accusation, and celebration into trial. I didn't plan on saying anything more. Not there, not like that. But something inside me had already been cracked wide open, and once the pressure valve released, there was no graceful way to reseal it without bleeding. So I did what I've never done before in front of my family, my sister, or even myself. I told the truth as it stood, raw and unpolished, without clever metaphors or convenient omissions, without editing myself into the version of me they could comfortably ignore. I looked at Amber first, not because she deserved the explanation, but because I owed her the full force of the honesty she had always dismissed in me as bitterness or jealousy or emotional immaturity. Last month, I began, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. I was at a client event, and I met someone who used to date Ryan, someone who wasn't aware he was getting married again. We talked. I didn't seek her out, I didn't plan it, but I told her something because it felt too heavy to carry by myself anymore. A few people in the crowd stirred, and I could feel the guests teetering between intrigue and discomfort, unsure whether they were witnessing the unraveling of a family or the beginning of something deeper and darker. I wasn't interested in softening the impact. Not now. I saw something on Ryan's phone, I continued. A message from someone saved as Jay. It wasn't flirty, it wasn't romantic. Not exactly. It said, I need the next payment by Friday, or I'm done being quiet. There was a ripple, a collective shift, as if the entire tent exhaled without meaning to. My mother whispered something into my father's ear, and he didn't react, just stared forward like he was watching a car crash and couldn't decide whether to look away or film it. Amber blinked at me like she couldn't process the syllables, like her brain was flipping through excuses, explanations, denials, anything to interrupt the story and make it hers again. I didn't know what it meant, I said. Now turning to Ryan, whose expression had frozen into something eerily calm, as if he had trained for this moment and was now waiting to see which version of the truth would survive longest. But I mentioned it to Tina, not because I wanted to blow up your wedding, but because I thought she had a right to know what kind of man you were becoming, or maybe always were. I didn't even know she still had feelings for you. I didn't know she'd show up here. But I don't regret it, and I won't apologize for it. Amber finally found her voice, sharp and high and quivering with fury. So you just decided to sabotage my wedding? Because you're miserable? Because you hate that someone actually picked me? Her words landed like ice water, cold and cruel and utterly predictable, but I didn't flinch. I didn't sabotage anything, I said. I didn't create the message. I didn't make the payment schedule. I didn't choose the alias. I just stopped pretending I couldn't see the cracks. Tina stepped forward then, slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking like a metronome of judgment. And when she spoke, it was not with rage, but with a clarity that carried more power than shouting ever could. It wasn't me, she said, looking directly at Ryan. I haven't taken a cent from you, and I haven't asked you for anything. Not now, not ever. A murmur spread again, this time louder, more urgent, as the pieces began to scatter into the air, and I saw it then. The way Amber's breath caught, the way Ryan's jaw flexed, the way even the waitstaff paused as if they too sensed that something important was finally slipping through the cracks of the facade. Ryan stood up, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve as though the moment demanded nothing more than mild tailoring. It was personal, he said quietly. A mistake I was trying to handle. It has nothing to do with today. But Tina wasn't finished. The messages Claire saw weren't from me. They're from Jordan. She's not an ex. She's someone else entirely. And the payments? They're child support. The word landed like a sledgehammer in a crystal cathedral, shattering whatever illusion of stability Amber had been gripping like a lifeline. Her knees buckled slightly, and she reached for the back of her chair, her mouth opening and closing like someone trying to surface from underwater without understanding where the air had gone. Whose child? She asked, voice thin, trembling. Ryan hesitated, just for a second, but in that second, every answer he didn't give said more than the ones he could have. It was before I met you, he said finally. And it's under control. Amber's scream wasn't theatrical. It wasn't the kind of outburst she used to manipulate or control. It was raw, cracked, deeply human. The kind of scream you only make when you realize that everything you've been building your identity on is rotting underneath your feet. She turned to me wild-eyed. You knew, and you didn't tell me. I shook my head slowly, more exhausted than angry now. I knew something. I didn't know everything. And when I tried to ask questions, you told me to stay in my lane. You didn't want to hear anything that didn't fit your fantasy. She opened her mouth, probably to accuse me of betrayal again, but Tina interrupted with a voice so calm it almost sounded bored. He told Jordan not to come forward. He offered her money to stay quiet until after the wedding. She was going to stay out of it, until the payment stopped. Amber stared at Ryan like he was a stranger, like the man in front of her had been replaced with someone colder, emptier, hungrier. You let me marry you, she said, her voice cracking. Knowing this, knowing you had a child and tried to hide it, knowing you weren't just lying to me, you were buying silence. Ryan didn't defend himself. He didn't beg. He didn't even look ashamed, because he wasn't. And that, more than anything, told me the truth I had never wanted to admit. This wasn't just about mistakes or misunderstandings. This was about someone who viewed people as obstacles or assets, never as equals. The room didn't erupt, it deflated. One by one, people began to stand, to murmur, to move, the mood shifting from horror to awkwardness, as if witnessing someone else's disaster meant they might catch it themselves. My mother was crying. My father looked embarrassed, and Amber stood there, still in her dream gown, still surrounded by imported roses, but no longer the center of admiration, only of pity. As I walked back to my seat, Tina brushed past me and said, under her breath, "You didn't plan it, but you finished it." And I realized, maybe that was true. I hadn't lit the fire. But I'd stopped pretending I didn't see the smoke. The drive home from the wedding should have been quiet, should have been filled with the kind of stunned, slow-processing silence that usually follows car crashes, breakups, or funerals. But instead, it was humming with a strange energy I couldn't quite name, a pulse of adrenaline and exhaustion that rolled through me in waves, as if my body still hadn't caught up with what my mouth had done. The night air outside the window felt cooler than I expected, sharp against my skin like a second judgment, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't shrink from it, didn't try to hide behind soft smiles or polite omissions. I just let it settle over me, honest and unfiltered, the way the truth finally had. Back at the reception, Amber hadn't cried in the way people expect a jilted bride to cry. There were no dramatic wails or ruined makeup or collapsing to the floor in front of her ruined cake. Instead, she stood frozen for a long time, her face rigid and vacant, as if her entire system had short-circuited and she was just waiting for someone to flip the breaker. When people began to leave, some quietly, some not so quietly, she didn't stop them, didn't beg for them to stay, didn't even acknowledge their exits. She just stood there, still gripping the stem of her champagne glass, with such force I thought it might shatter in her hand. Eyes locked on Ryan, like he was a painting she suddenly realized had been forged. He tried, briefly, to salvage the moment, not with emotion, not with apology, but with logic, with words so carefully constructed they felt lifted from a lawyer's script. All technicalities and timeframes, no remorse, no heart. And I watched, almost detached, as Amber turned her face away from him not out of grief, but disgust, as if she were physically repulsed by the sound of him trying to explain away the collapse of their carefully staged illusion with phrases like, "It's complicated," and "You don't understand what she's like," and "I was going to tell you after the honeymoon." The honeymoon that now, of course, would never happen. Eventually, Tina left. Not in triumph, not in smugness, but quietly, slipping out before the last speech could be awkwardly cut off, before the staff began to clear away the untouched entrees and discarded programs, before the spell that held everyone hostage to the fantasy was fully broken. She glanced at me once on her way out, not smiling, not gloating, but simply nodding. A gesture that said, this wasn't justice, but at least it was a start. I nodded back, unsure whether I was grateful or guilty, unsure whether I had liberated my sister or destroyed something she had needed to believe in more than she needed it to be real. Amber didn't speak to me that night, and I didn't expect her to. She stormed past me in the parking lot like I was a photographer trying to capture her lowest moment. Like I was the villain in the final act of her movie, the bitter older sister who couldn't stand to let her shine. But I didn't chase her. I didn't explain. I didn't even try to soften the blow. Because the truth was, for the first time in my life, I hadn't made myself small for her comfort. I hadn't filtered my warnings or wrapped my insights in sugar. I had said what needed to be said. And if she chose to paint that as sabotage, so be it. Because sometimes, telling the truth feels like betrayal to those who've built their lives on denial. The next morning, I woke up to 36 unread messages, 5 missed calls from my mother, and a news alert from a local wedding blog that had picked up footage from someone's live stream, quoting the line that would now be immortalized in digital history. Tell them what you told me last month. There was already a thread on Reddit speculating whether it had been a publicity stunt, whether I was secretly in love with Ryan, whether the child was mine. The usual conspiratorial nonsense that blooms in the cracks left by half-told truths and elegant dresses stained with scandal. I didn't respond to any of it. I sat at my kitchen table, still in my robe, drinking reheated coffee and scrolling through the chaos I had set in motion, not with glee or shame, but with a kind of detached clarity that felt like standing in the eye of a storm. The world was spinning, but I wasn't anymore, and that in itself was a kind of victory. Later that afternoon, I received a text, not from Amber, not from my parents, not from anyone who had been in the tent when the grenade went off, but from Tina. It was short, just 3 words. You were right. I didn't reply immediately. I just stared at the screen, thinking about all the times I hadn't been sure, all the moments I had doubted my instincts, swallowed my questions, nodded when I should have shouted. And now, here was the first real confirmation. Not that I had been righteous or heroic or even wise, but that I had seen something clearly and I hadn't looked away. Eventually, I typed back, "Thanks, I didn't even believe myself until I said it out loud." That was the truth. Because the hardest part about being the easy one, the quiet one, the good sister, isn't that you don't have thoughts or anger or judgment. It's that you train yourself so thoroughly to suppress them that by the time you finally let them out, you're not even sure if they still belong to you. And once they're spoken, once they're airborne and irreversible, you realize how long they've been rotting inside you, how much lighter you feel just from dragging them into daylight. Even if no one claps, even if no one thanks you, even if the only thing you win is your own breath back. Amber hasn't spoken to me since. She deleted her wedding photos, canceled her honeymoon, and posted a vague quote on Instagram about rebirth through fire that her friends liked out of habit more than understanding. Ryan, according to the last whisper I heard through a mutual contact, has retained a lawyer to renegotiate his financial arrangements with the woman he swore was just a ghost from his past. And me? I'm not vindicated. I'm not celebrated. I'm not even forgiven. But I am, for the first time, free. Free from performing support in a play I never auditioned for. Free from swallowing instincts for the sake of peace. Free from the endless loop of keeping secrets to protect people who wouldn't protect me if the roles were reversed. And as I sat in my car later that evening, parked in the lot of a grocery store I hadn't planned to stop at, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, tired, older than I felt, but with eyes that finally looked like they belonged to someone who didn't owe anyone an explanation. "You wanted the spotlight, Amber. I just turned it on."